Homage to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. The question that's been asked is, I am troubled a great deal by what I consider mental heaviness or pain. It was there before the pandemic, a general sense of melancholy and sadness. It's present even when I'm busy, when things seem to be going okay or not okay, and in the spaces in between. With the pandemic, it feels like this mental heaviness is getting heavier. Part of it could also be loneliness despite living with people. Either way, no matter what I do, I try to overcome it, but I can't seem to lift this feeling. What would the Buddha advise? So sadness is actually a very important but constant thing that we all face. You know, it's this mental heaviness is probably a really good way to look at it. Sometimes sadness we can't really diagnose. We just feel this sinking feeling, this heavy feeling. And, you know, we mentally go a little bit down, like something's pressing on us and we feel quite down about things. But it's something that the Buddha talked about. It's something that's associated with the First Noble Truth. And we can definitely look at it and look at ways that we can understand it, because when you understand it, then it's much easier to address. And then also to see what the Buddha says. And he does say a great deal about how sadness comes to arise, because I think that's one of the things, you know, we look at samudaya, atthangama a lot, the arising and passing away. And so when it comes to anything, including sadness, you want to know what's the cause of it, what causes it to come to arise, and then what causes it to pass away. And also, how can we mitigate it or even prevent ourselves from increasing the amount of sadness that we have. So we have a number of tools that we can look at. We have the nutriments and going the wrong ways, which helps us to understand it. We also have our understanding of the hindrances, the nivaranas, that also helps us to understand it. Also, sadness is a feeling. So when we know about all feelings result in dukkha, then we also have another way of understanding it. And then we have other things in our toolkit, some that we've spoken about before, and then others that we haven't, that can be touched on at least, in terms of all the different ways that we can temporarily, I suppose, lift this feeling. And I guess if we really persist with the path, then you can lift it fully. So let's have a look at a few different Dhammas. So when we look at the suttas for the words of the Buddha, we find that the Four Noble Truths, and in particular the definition for the First Noble Truth, outlines 12 different things, and then also summarizes by saying that the 5 aggregates subject to clinging are suffering. And so within that, sadness is part of the First Noble Truth of suffering. So sadness in Pali is domanassa. So domanassa is a term we need to be very comfortable and familiar with, because it arises a great deal when it comes to, I guess, our vipaka-kamma. Like when we birth this body, it does result in sadness arising. And that happens because of birth leads to aging, sickness, and death. And so the result of that is that we will be sad. As the body ages, we become sad. As the body sickens, we become sad. And when the body dies, we also become sad, whether it is ourselves or whether it is other people. So sadness, one needs to also recognize, is the resultant kamma of having birthed another body. So that's in the bigger picture sense. So that's our starting point. So that's when we know that we can't run away from sadness, but we need to understand how we create more sadness as well. And that's something that we'll look at. But sadness also comes in the form of loneliness and other kinds of words that we use for it. So we have labels that we associate with particular words, but that sinking feeling is something that the Buddha talks about a lot. So we can look at even Buddha's definition of sadness. There are numerous suttas again that go through Buddha's definition for sadness, one of them appears in the Satchivibhanga Sutta. So it's Majjhima Nikaya, discourse number 141. And the question is, and what is sadness? And the answer given is mental pain, mental displeasure, the painful, unpleasant feeling that's born from mind contact. This is called sadness. So it's a mental affliction, something that afflicts our mind, and it raises itself as an unpleasant feeling, something that is painful. So there's many things that we can understand in this way, that we feel sad when the mind is afflicted in that way. It makes contact with things that make us sad, that for sadness to arise, and therefore we need to look at that process of how does that happen. One of the things that the Buddha does say, that the origin of it, like when we think about where it comes from wrong view. Because if you remember, we always try to fix this feeling. And what have we said before about feeling? Well, all feeling leads to dukkha. And how do we try to fix it? We usually try to fix it with tanha, craving. So we go and try and fix it with material objects and experiences through material objects. So that's where the abhijja comes in, the covetousness. Also, when you think about the hindrance, kama chanda arises, sensual desire. And so when that arises, what the Buddha says in most suttas, and we'll look at a few of those, is that when covetousness arises, domanassa is the result. So we create more of it out of micchaditti, thinking, out of the wrong view, that if we go and chase something to try and fix it, it'll make it better. But unfortunately, what happens is through the process of even the decay of the experience, the aging of a person, the whole gamut of it, when we hold on to feeling, it's not really something that the Buddha or the noble arahants would advise, because it's sliding in nature. Abhijja domanassa is a well-trodden path, covetousness and then sadness. So another way of looking at it is from the arahant's perspective. The arahant would not go and try and fix this sad feeling by having something to eat or drink. And they wouldn't go and try to experience something in that way, because they don't hold on to Vedana, feeling in that way. They don't try and fix it in a way that they know won't work. So that's very useful to actually think about, that an arahant does not try and fix it in that way. They don't even try to listen to something, watch something in order to try and fix it, knowing that's not going to really help. What you actually do when you do that is you activate the paticca samuppada, because it just kicks off with the tanha, craving. And so you always end up back in dukkha anyway. So that's something that you need to take into one's mind in order to try and overcome, to understand, not to make it worse. When you go to chapter 6 of the Pethakopadesa, and we looked at this when we looked at the overview of the Four Noble Truths. And what this is it basically says that dukkha, pain or suffering, is the footing for sadness. So this is where all the feelings come into it. And sadness has the characteristic of oppressing the mind, citta sampillana. And this oppressing of the mind we understand by the heaviness that comes. So in your question, the mind gets very heavy. There's this mental heaviness. And we can call it sadness, we can call it loneliness, but we're afflicted at that point. And so the decisions we make from that point are from that sad feeling, from that mental downness. We feel quite down. When it really becomes too much, when we keep going to the wrong things to increase the sadness, knowingly or unknowingly, through sense objects and other experiences to try and fix the feeling, then it can lead to quite bad depression at its most extreme, because we're quite unresolved unfulfilled in how we try to fix it. It doesn't work because of the sliding nature of it, the decaying of the experience. It's death-bound. And so we get quite, from sadness, we can get quite angry. We can look at this from contact as nutriment. We can get quite angry because the poison in our mind is, it should be different than this. I can't accept how it is, that it keeps sliding. I can't hold on to it, this sukha feeling. Even when you have something to eat, drink, go and watch something, go and listen to something, once it stops, then you have to reconstruct it again. And so you get quite worn out through the feeling of sadness and trying to fix it, that essentially you end up getting quite angry, you hate the situation. And so when you say, I hate my job, I hate this pandemic, I hate, so many different things. I hate that holidays end. I hate that my thing broke down. I hate my partner. Because the thing is, nothing can really be sustained in that way. And so when we keep trying to reconstruct, we get very worn out. And we still persist because there's a resistance but we can fix this. From the perspective of me and mine, the self, it says, I should be able to fix this. It shouldn't be this way. I should be able to fix it. And so you end up with sadness being the footing for sorrow. And you can understand why, because you keep beating yourself up and maybe even beating other people up in the process, because you're trying to make this thing work. And when we hold on to feelings, the thing when you investigate it in meditation is that none of these feelings you can hold on to in a way that sustains sukha. So when it's unpleasant feelings, we try and make it into pleasant feelings. Even with the constructed feelings of neither painful nor pleasant feelings, we try and make it into pleasant feelings, even through meditation. And we try and hold on to that. But even that, even the very high mental absorptions, at some point, they actually start to shatter. Even the ones that you stay a very long time. And so when that happens, you get devastated. So even with the ones that we try and make into pleasant feelings, they change. And so that's why you always end up with this shattering effect when you hold on to feeling, that it disintegrates, it shatters, and you're devastated. Initially you're sad. If it gets worse, you get angry. If it gets worse than that, you get very depressed. And then you're just hate-filled. You go the bad way with hate. So this is our predicament. When we birth this body, this is our predicament. So you've seen this particular table before, this process that happens with the agreeable object, disagreeable object, and neither agreeable nor disagreeable object. So this has been explained a number of times, so we're not going to look at it another time. But you can see this is what we mean. All feelings through sense contact, through taking different objects, they result in three kinds of dukkha. And this is a very powerful meditation. If you haven't done this meditation, and you haven't focused on it, it's very, very helpful to take your own examples and just see that this is what happens. So you take an example for the agreeable object, the disagreeable object, and the neither agreeable nor disagreeable object. And you see, how do I end up in these different kinds of dukkha, despite the three different kinds of feeling? Very, very powerful meditation, and very compelling to actually abandon holding on to feeling, to learn how to bear with feeling that arises rather than try and fix it. And so I would highly recommend and encourage to pay attention and really spend some time with this meditation. And on the poya, the last poya, we looked at the arising and passing away of the five aggregates. And so when we cling to the five aggregates, usually what we're saying is that we're trying to fix it through craving. So the statement that we looked at is, you can't fix dukkha with tanha. So you can't fix suffering with craving. But that's what we actually do when we say, you have to fix it. I must fix this. When we say to us, you have to fix this. And that's where it's being propelled from. The momentum that we have inside is the way we've been trained or conditioned is to always go and fix it with eating something, drinking something, doing something. What we don't do is wait and bear with the conditions that have arisen. Make sure that right view is there. Because if right view is there, then you don't go towards things that are sliding, that are death-bound. You don't go through objects that are death-bound. At least you don't go to them straight away as the go-to position. When you're training yourself in the Noble Eightfold Path, because this is the Noble Eightfold Path that we're walking, well, what we're trying to do is to activate right view. Wrong view is rushing to try and fix it. Right view is actually one where we're training that we don't immediately go with that. We wait, and eventually we might still have to have that cup of coffee or go and do something. But initially, when dukkha arises, Buddha always says, don't just respond to it. It's a bit like when you're taught and you're meditating, don't just simply move when the body aches. Wait. Eventually you have to move the body, but initially when that pain arises in the leg or the neck or whatever, you're often recommended not to respond to it straight away. In some meditation lineages, they don't respond to it at all. You just bear with the whole thing. But we don't necessarily have to do that in training, but it's part of the training is actually to find the ways and means not to respond to Vedana. And the strongest thing is actually through upekkha. So ones that have really gone quite far in their practice, they develop a very strong equanimity, upekkha, towards Vedana. That's what the Arahant does. There is upekkha, equanimity. And the way that an Arahant really does this is through the Iddhipadas, the basis of spiritual power, because they are able to help you sustain the upekkha. Iddhipadas mean that you don't shake. Because often when dukkha arises, we shake. We also shake because there's not enough wisdom and saddha, the conviction, the confidence in the Buddha's teaching, that is needed not to run to the wrong things, the wrong pathway. If you have enough wisdom infused with the right view, and you have through that wisdom, conviction in the Buddha's words, you actually are able to then not shake. If you remember, saddha is the pillar, the foundation pillar that does not shake. And so this process is very important, establishing the right view. If you have full confidence in the Buddha, you don't try to fix it through sensual pleasures, through things that are death-bound. And so when that happens, you don't kick off the paticca samuppada, you don't activate dependent origination and create more suffering. So it's a very important thing. Now some of you have learnt the Iddhipadas, we've been through that before. Not sure whether you've been training it, but it's very important. Iddhipadas become your base of spiritual power. They truly do. They become the strength behind which you don't shake. You remember this process of samadhi, leading to panya, leading to more saddha, and around it goes again. Saddha, of course, always sustains the right view. And so there's a bit of a triangular process happening there. And this is what the Arahats have taught. So there's some deep Dhamma in there, but it's good to know this is where you head to when you develop the path. That sadness, you still have to bear with sadness, but the way you live with it is you don't create more, and you also use things like upekkha and the Iddhipadas to get through these conditions. Like right now with the pandemic and how things are going quite bad in the world. In order to bear with all the news, and if you don't read much news, that's very helpful. You don't keep contacting it. Contacting, mind contact, what the Buddha calls, increases sadness. And so you don't want to do that. It also increases anger and increases hate. because you make contact. Pasahara, it's the contact as nutriment. So it's very good to remember these things. And therefore you protect yourself, you protect your mind. And a lot of people who are skilled in these iddhipadas, in upeka, that's what is cultivated right now, as well as the other Brahma Viharas, but very much so that you're able to make wise choices during this time period, and you also have a very calm and settled mind. And of course, from that calm and settled mind, you can help others. You can help others to lift their mind. Lifting the mind, keeping the mind straight and upright is very important at this time. Now, one of the really important things to remember, and this has been emphasized before, when feelings slide, like when it goes from pleasant to unpleasant feelings, when it's unpleasant feelings and we try to fix it to make it pleasant, and then that slides, and then we're left back again with unpleasant feelings, even the constructed ones where it's neither painful nor pleasant to begin with, but inadvertently we always try to make them pleasant, but they also change. So it's not a personal thing. This is something that, if you remember, with the understanding of the First Noble Truth, it's a universal, common suffering. So all of us birth a body out of ignorance and out of craving. And when we do so, this is a universal thing. We are all subject to old age, sickness, and death as a result of that. So what we don't want to do when there is sadness, when we slide from peak moments, when we meet ripening kamma and it's not pleasant, and there's this sadness, we need to make sure that we don't keep personalizing this, that we don't talk about me and my suffering, me and my sadness. This happens because of my job. This happened because of my family. All the me and mines. It shouldn't. So we have lots of shoulds and shouldn'ts. And the thing with the Arahants is they recognize that in these situations, one needs to stop personally identifying with the dukkha feelings, whether they are painful or whether they're sad or whether they're heavy or whether you feel lonely. Whatever label we put to it, domanassa comes in many of these guises. But as we know, the footing is dukkha, so it's linked. And the mind gets very heavy, and what happens is we start to make decisions that are unhelpful. They actually usually increase the sadness. So one of the things that's really useful is to contemplate through the 5 frequent contemplations. Definitely to contemplate all 5, but there are a number that are quite useful within it. So in terms of being subject to old age, one recognizes I am subject to old age just like everybody else. I am not exempt from old age just like everybody else. Now the aging, you recognize aging in oneself. That's the most penetrative, strongest way to look at it. You also recognize it in other people. And there's no intoxication with youth when you know everybody is actually aging. There is this decaying process with our bodies that we've constructed. But it can also be looked at in terms of the decaying of feeling. That when it comes to that process, it's also there. And of course, we can contemplate illness, death, and then being parted from what is pleasing to us, what is dear and agreeable. The other one that's really important is to understand kamma. So we said at the beginning that the vipaka-kamma, the resultant kamma, the fruit of our actions before, is this body which is aging, getting sick, and will eventually pass away. And our loved ones are the same. We need to recognize that as part of the meditation of the 5 frequent contemplations. This last one is very important to see that you understand that you are the owner and heir of that kamma. So part of that is recognizing we have to live with the sadness that comes having birthed this body. It's a very bitter pill. But because we birth this body, we are subject to these things that there is no escape from. Old age, sickness, and death, there's no escape from. So part of this thing this last part of 5 frequent contemplations, this last contemplation is very powerful for us. Because when you say, I am the owner of my kamma, the heir of my kamma, I have kamma as my origin, kamma as my relative, kamma as my resort, I will be the heir of whatever kamma. So basically we are saying we are the kamma of our past actions that birthed this body, that have now birthed aging, sickness and death as something that is going to come. Aging is happening right now. Sickness is also happening right now. And death is on its way. So not in a morbid way, but in that formulaic way that Buddha is telling us this is the common predicament, the bigger picture. When you do that, you realize that's what Buddha means. Sadness is also a result of past actions. Out of micca-ditthi, wrong view, we did things, we inclined, we allowed the consciousness to re-establish somewhere. And so we birthed another body. So what we want to do now is, knowing that we're the owner of the kamma, we need to live with that sadness, but we don't want to make more. And so we now need to know, as the owner of the kamma, whatever we do now can increase the sadness until we pass away. And so that's something that we don't want to do. We don't want to misapprehend feelings. What we misapprehend is the perversion that there is happiness in the painful. And so we're going to look at that. A sutta that's quite helpful in backing up or supporting what we've talked about is this Nibbutta Sutta. And it's in Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 3, discourse number 55. And basically it talks about Nibbana, and it talks about giving up greed, hatred, and delusion. And essentially the question was asked to the Buddha, Master Gautama, they say that extinguishment is visible in this very life. In what way is extinguishment visible in this very life, immediately effective, inviting inspection, relevant, so that sensible people can know it for themselves? So then the Buddha says, a greedy person, overcome by greed, intends to hurt themselves, hurt others, and hurt both. They experience mental pain and sadness. When greed has been given up, they don't intend to hurt themselves, hurt others, and hurt both. They don't experience mental pain and sadness. This is how extinguishment is visible in this very life. And then the Buddha goes on to explain the same thing for a hateful person overcome by hatred, and then also for a deluded person overcome by delusion. So same kind of explanation. So what this really tells us is that it's only when you achieve Nibbana that mental pain and sadness passes away. So that's quite a huge thing to understand, that the atthangama, the passing away of mental pain and sadness, domanassa, is at the point of Nibbana, because you've given up greed, hatred, and delusion, and seen through birth, aging, sickness, and death. So that's a very, very powerful thing to take on, to actually know when we say that we still have to live with sadness. This is what it means, that it's because we've birthed this body and that we're still with greed, hatred, and delusion. We can't uproot everything, even on this path, until arahantship, that you have to learn to live with it. And so really the answer is always going to be, one needs to develop the Noble Eightfold Path. One needs to know the distinction between kusala and akusala, what is wholesome, what is unwholesome, what needs to be cultivated, what needs not to be cultivated in that sense. So very important piece of Dhamma here. So we're going to pull a few Dhammas together that we've been through before. So if you've been through the talk that was given on wakefulness, the strength of wakefulness, we looked at this. This also is similarly talked about in the Pamada Vihari Sutta. I think the audio has been published for this. Haven't done the slides for it and put it up onto YouTube, but it's definitely there as on the podcast. But when it comes to Indriya Samvara, this sense restraint, we've talked about it a lot. We've talked about it in the Sekapatipada Sutta, and this is where this particular thing comes from on this slide, that we talk about the security guard. So when we have sense restraint, essentially what we're putting there is someone to guard the doors to the sense faculties. So in the Sekapatipada, it talks about Indriyesu Guttadavaro, which is essentially similar to sense restraint, and also similar to Santindriyo when we talk about calming the sense faculties when we do Metta Bhavana, the loving kindness meditation. So what the Sekapatipada says is, there is the case where the disciple of the Noble Ones, on seeing a form with the eye, doesn't grasp at any attributes or characteristics by which, if one were to dwell without restraint over the faculty of the eye, evil, unskillful qualities such as covetousness, so this abhijja, and sadness, domanassa, might assail them. And then one practices for its restraint, guards the faculty of the eye, and one achieves restraint with regard to the faculty of the eye. And this applies to all 6 sense faculties, so the other 5 as well. So the ear, eye, nose, tongue, body, and mind, all 6. So this becomes very important. Indriya Samvara becomes very important because when you start to understand it, you know that it leads to making wiser choices. You know that there is danger, like the simile of the tortoise we've talked about many times, that when you sense danger, and the Buddha's words tell us there is danger when we don't have sense restraint, when we make contact, phassa, contact as nutriment. We go towards sense objects, whether they're sights, sounds, taste, the whole part and parcel that goes sense faculties, sense objects. So we know there's danger. We don't want to go to sadness. And so Buddha says, Buddha's security guard in place, essentially. And sense restraint, when we don't restrain the senses, what you find is that envy can arise. When envy arises, it triggers covetousness, and it comes back to non-sense restraint. So put it this way, when you don't restrain your senses, say for example you go onto Instagram and you see something, immediately you get triggered. You go, I want that. So if you see something that's associated with food, you go, oh, I want that. So you immediately want to head out the door, go to the place, or you want to order it online. Likewise, if you see something that someone is wearing, it's someone marketing some piece of clothing or a car or a phone or some material object, you immediately get enticed. You immediately want to go and look on Amazon or some online store, or even leave the house and go to a store if that's still possible for you. Same kind of thing. So that's where envy, covetousness arises. Covetousness is the starting point. Envy is where it starts getting fulfilled. So it's quite dangerous. Likewise, the other way, if you pay particular attention to people in your life, so people you look up to or people that you work with, people that you're just surrounded by, or maybe even someone you dislike, normally out of envy you will go and look. So if it's someone in your family, not you don't necessarily envy them, but say it's someone in your family, but what happens is you see them, maybe it's your brother or sister, they've got some new gadget. Well, immediately from envy at that point, you go back and look. You want to see what they're doing. You want to see what has happened. So it goes both ways is what I'm trying to say. You can investigate that also in meditation, how sense restraint or non-sense restraint leads to envy. Envy or some kind of affliction towards another person makes you want to go and look. And so you have non-sense restraint the other way. So that's why when people say social media, watching things, looking at people when you go out, so if you're very prone to looking around, then you need to know you're activating certain things, and therefore you will eventually, if there is abhijja, there's covetousness, then it will end up in domanassa. And a lot of these things you start with the looking, but the other sense faculties apply as well. When you taste something, that can also trigger something. When you hear something, that is also the same thing. And the same definitely when it comes to the sense of touch and the sense of smell, and of course definitely the mind. The mind is the one that remembers and also wants to make contact again over and over. And so when this happens, you're always chasing the sukha feeling. Even when you're angry or upset, you're always trying to fix it. So again, this is very important, that if you establish a security guard, it can actually prevent creating more sadness, ending up with more sadness due to the feeling actually changing, reverting back to dukkha. So what we've been talking about so far is very much linked with the nutriments that we've been studying. The physical nutriment being based on form, and the contactless nutriment very much based on feeling. That's where consciousness tries to steady. So for physical nutriment, always trying to steady on form. And for contactless nutriment, always steadying on feeling. So the perversion that is always there with physical nutriment, we see fair and foul, we see attractive and unattractive. That's why we go for it. We don't see that it actually is death-bound. And the same with contactless nutriment. In that sense, our misapprehension, the perversion, whether it's perception, thought, or view, wrong view, is that we see pleasure or pleasant feeling in what is painful. And we misapprehend. And so we keep trying to fix in the wrong way, thinking that one, we can fix it, which we can't. And when we try and fix it, it goes these bad ways. The hindrances actually arise here. So when you look at the highlighted terms, we get to covetousness. So physical nutriment is always driven by desire, taking delight in something that is death-bound, holding on to covetousness. Covetousness, as we know from the suttas, it is very connected with kamacchanda, the hindrance of kamacchanda, sensual desire. And when it comes to this feeling of sadness that arises through painful feelings, this is associated with vipaka, ill will. So under the contactless nutriment, you see you're tied to ill will. So you can see how the hindrances are kicking off when we go towards the nutriments. So in this case, when we look at covetousness and kamacchanda, this sensual desire, the Buddha gives a simile of debt. And when it comes to sadness or mental pain, it's tied to ill will, which is vipaka, which is Buddha gives the simile of going sick. So when we're sick and we go towards these wrong things to try and fix it, we become indebted. So when we know that there's danger in these death-bound things that increase our debts, when we have sense restraint from these things, we don't go into debt. So at the manifested level, that's one way of not going into debt at a genuine level. Manifestation, we don't actually buy into all these things. We don't try and fix through gadgets and expensive things and expensive experiences. You save a lot of money, quite literally, especially if you really understand this Dhamma. But in the sense of how the Buddha talks about it, you see it's true, but also you realize in your mind, you don't get indebted to making contact in order to have this physical nutriment in this way. And you also don't get indebted, you don't get sick. The mind doesn't get sick with ill will, sadness, anger, and hate. That's where we don't want to go. And so when you realize that there's a sickness here, you know you can actually treat it. You know you can actually do something about it. So when it comes to the physical nutriment, you know that you need to cultivate metta. You know that at the end of the day, the pairing with going the wrong way through desire is really to cultivate more metta. We also know that with ill will, metta is also very much needed. When you actually understand the pathway, so dukkha patipada danda vinya is very much about metta. So that's the antidote, the medicine for the first unprofitable direction. The second unprofitable direction, the medicine is compassion, karuna, appamana. But you need a lot of metta in order to sustain karuna. So that's why ill will is there. You need the medicine there as metta as well. And we'll come to that eventually. We haven't got to doing the patipadas yet, but the dukkha patipada danda vinya, painful way with slow realization, matches the first unprofitable direction. And dukkha patipada kipa vinya, the painful way with quick realization, matches the second unprofitable direction. It's the medicine for it. So you need a lot of compassion. One other thing that is really useful is actually to give up tanha. You give up tanha. You give up this craving. And so that's part of that track. But that's for later. But it's sometimes good to have an idea that in order not to go the wrong way through hate, one needs to have more compassion. Compassion comes by giving up, renunciating, by giving up wanting to fix the feeling, being able to bear with the conditions, but ultimately giving up tanha. And the iddhipadas in that pathway really need to be there. And you'll see that when we go through it. And so when we look at this Akusala Rasi Sutta, what we recognize is that the 5 hindrances are a complete heap of unwholesome. They're akusala, they're unprofitable, they're unwholesome. And so the pictures here on this particular slide are what we just spoke about debt and about getting sick. So when you have the hindrance of sensual desire, you're in debt. And when you're with the hindrance of ill will, you're sick. This is part of the sickness that arises when you try and continually fix it and you end up with ill will, because what you're trying to fix with is death-bound, and this situation, our predicament, is death-bound as well. You will have noticed in answering this question, I've given a lot of different Dhamma pieces that one can use to, one, understand that sadness is something that we have to live with, the one that comes with birthing this body and the result of that, but also around not creating more sadness. There's different things that the Buddha has taught us. And so at the level of listening to this answer, there are people that know different things and have different tools in their meditation toolkit. So some of these meditations people already know, some of them I haven't been through and posted to YouTube. Some I have, some I haven't. Some have gone to the podcast and also haven't been posted to YouTube. But generally speaking, eventually I'll be able to get some of these up. But this is another one that I haven't spoken about at great length. I've mentioned before, but I haven't spoken at great length to explain it fully. But the reason I'm putting it up here is because I know some of you actually know. And it's a reminder to say that this is another way of meditating that can help you to overcome sadness. So there's 2 particular lines that are pretty essential. So dadato punyam pavadati, sanyamato verang nachiyati. So these first 2 lines, by giving merit grows. So generosity is a huge way of overcoming feeling, because inevitably, one, you're cultivating giving up stinginess, which is, it goes against craving. So when you're generous, you're giving up something that you would have had for yourself, and you're thinking about others, so more compassion arises. So when you recall that in your mind, something that you've done in the past, or all the things you've done in the past, it lifts the mind. The mind gets happy. And when you do things right now that are generous towards people, again, the mind lifts. So it's a reminder. To overcome mental pain and sadness, one thing that one can do is to recall in your mind all the acts of generosity and to cultivate more generosity. It overcomes tanha. And then when it comes to hate, this sangyamato verang nachiyati, no hate is stored for one restrained. This is where we re-emphasize sense restraint, guarding the doors to the sense faculties, having the security guard. What it says is that it doesn't lead to going the bad way through hate. Because if you don't contact, if there's no pasahara, no contact as nutriment, then you don't go back towards the physical nutriment. And therefore, if you're not doing that, then you're not going the bad way through desire, and you're not going the bad way through hate. So essentially then, one who is skilled abandons evil things. You're going towards kusala, not akusala. And therefore, you're overcoming the flood of sensual desire, overcoming the flood of wanting to come to exist, you're overcoming the flood of views. Now, this is a very deep meditation, but eventually, if you keep meditating on this, you overcome all the floods and realize, ultimate liberation. So this particular meditation is very good for overcoming floods. So when you know the satara hara, the 4 nutriments, and how it all is bound and eventually leads to these floods, and then eventually go the wrong way because consciousness steadies on the wrong things, then you know through this meditation how not to do that. It's a very powerful meditation. But just those 2 things are pretty key in terms of knowing how not to do certain things and what to cultivate. Cultivating wholesome at this time, generosity is very helpful. You're thinking not of yourself, but of others. You're giving up things. The giving up process is chipping away at tanha, chipping away at craving. Very, very useful. One of the things that probably most of us don't do enough of is practicing gratitude. And it seems like such a simple thing, but it is actually very, very difficult and quite a high practice when you really get into it, because gratitude is part of mudita. So it's a joyful thing. So joy for others, happiness for others, please for others, a deeper understanding of letting go of me and mine. So at a base level, and we will go into eventually mudita apamana, so immeasurable mudita, but not right here. But just in relation on touching on it as a remedy for at least not creating more sadness than what we already experience, is that quite often it's good to sit down, whether it's in meditation or not, but to simply reflect on what we can be grateful for. And of course, there's much to be grateful for. There's great gratitude to our parents. There's gratitude to our teachers. There's gratitude to our colleagues. There's gratitude to our children. There's gratitude to people in our neighborhood who do certain things. There's gratitude to the people that work on the roads, the people that are working in supermarkets, the people that are working in banks, the people that make all these processes of life come together. And when you think about, we've spoken about this before, the process of food production, from start to finish, there's so much to be grateful for. Even if you grow things in your own garden, you're grateful for the bees that pollinate, the insects that pollinate. You're grateful for the worms that help you to create compost. So many different things to this whole life cycle that when we understand that we're fully dependent on each other to sustain life, one can be very humbled by this process. And the key is that when you cultivate this kind of mind state that is humble, that is gentle, that is infused with a greater understanding about the dependency, then you also start to realize that you are able to lift yourself out of mental pain, at least temporarily, with this particular practice. So I would also encourage that when it comes to mental pain and sadness, loneliness, those kinds of feelings, it's also to look at the other side of the coin. What can we be grateful for? And there is always something to be grateful for, whether it's someone giving you a meal, preparing it for you, or someone just asking how you are. Simple things. And all the other things I just mentioned. But yeah, this is another way of actually at least lifting the mind. So this last sutta that I wanted to put into our meditation toolkit is from the Dutiya Samugata Sapaya Sutta. It's in Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 35, discourse number 32. And it actually links up with our meditation that we've done from the Silavanta Sutta or Sila Sutta, also in the Samyutta Nikaya. So it links up with the meditation where we go, is it worth taking as me and mine? Now the reason why this is very important is because our post-perception, when we have the taint of existence under the contact as nutriment, when we go down that path, if you remember, the taint that activates in that path, that enables us or projects us, propels us to go in the bad way through hate, is the post-perception of me and mine. That I can control this, I can make it last, I can hold on to this feeling. And so it's worth taking as mine. So it links in with that. So we already have this meditation in our toolkit, but I wanted to go through this particular sutta because it actually explicitly points it out. Buddha has many places in the suttas where he gives very similar teachings with these 3 questions. So the question that he asks the monks in this instance is any feeling that arises with mind contact as condition permanent or impermanent? So is it nicca or anicca? So he's saying, if there is any vedana, any feeling that happens because we've taken contact as nutriment, is it nicca or anicca? Permanent or impermanent? Lasting or unlasting? So the monks answer, impermanent, Venerable Sir. So it's anicca. Then the Buddha asks the second question, is what is impermanent suffering or happiness? So is he saying, if this is anicca, is it dukkha or sukha? And so the monks answer, it's dukkha, it's suffering, Venerable Sir. Right? So if it's jati, jara, vyadi, marana, which means it's anicca, it's dukkha, it's suffering, it's painful. So then the third question is what is impermanent suffering? So is what is impermanent, suffering and subject to change, fit to be regarded thus? This is mine, this I am, this is myself. So Buddha is saying, is it really worth taking as me and mine? Is it worth taking as self? And the answer, of course, is no, Venerable Sir. Now, this is that meditation, is it worth taking as me and mine? So when you see that there is birth, aging, and death, then you know it's anicca. When you see the jara, the aging, you realize it is subject to change. There is dukkha there, vipranama dukkha. So if it is this anicca, impermanent, dukkha, vipranama dukkha, painfulness in change, subject to change, is it worth taking as mine? Is it worth saying, this I am? Is it worth taking as self? And so in your meditation, it's so powerful when you see it. You just have this massive aha moment. So if you've done this meditation, you know what I mean. It's so powerful. And the thing is, we need to constantly do this meditation because then you really realize whatever you grab onto, it's death-bound, it's a death trap. And so you cannot hold on to any feelings that don't change in that way. So very, very powerful. So this is the other thing that one can do to actually not create more sadness and heaviness, and to be able to bear with the conditions that do arise. So we have karma that ripens. So collectively right now with the pandemic and what's happening in the world, this is our collective karma ripening. Things that we've done in previous lifetimes and this lifetime, we are experiencing that now. Yes, there are certain things that we can do to help the situation, but that will only bear fruit later. And so right now we have to bear with what's happening in the world collectively and not see that personally. It's a collective thing. And we need to actually understand that and therefore not create more sadness out of this present situation, and therefore also not create more sorrow out of this situation, not to even become hate-filled because of this situation, to understand the Buddha's teachings in this way. So to close off, I thought I would just summarize, because there's a lot of Dhamma pieces we went through, and don't be alarmed if you don't understand everything. Just pick what is useful to you. So the person that asked the question, pick what resonated with you and work with it. Really try and work with a particular meditation that will help you to actually see through domanassa. But the main thing that one really needs to understand, all of us, is that it comes from micca-ditthi. In order to fix something that cannot be fixed, we actually go towards things that are death-bound, that are actually trapping us and making it worse. We create more sadness when we try and fix it with the wrong things. And to know that we need to bear with the resultant karma of having birthed this body, we have to actually live with a certain amount of sadness. And there is a way, of course, that we've been through that we can try and lift the mind. So the first thing that I haven't touched on before is keeping the precepts. This is our wholesome container. So when we walk the Noble Eightfold Path, there are precepts that we are keeping anyway. When we lean towards Dasakusala, the 10 wholesome types of conduct, the 5 precepts are also included in that. But definitely if you want to keep the 5, if you want to keep 8, keeping precepts actually guards ourselves from danger. So see it that way, that if you adopt to keep the precepts, there is a certain amount of purity that protects you. And it's a very wholesome thing. Like during this pandemic and during difficult times, it's always recommended to keep the precepts, because you're also protected. Like there are other devas and things like that. They have fondness for people that keep precepts, and they would help those that keep precepts. So the second one is generosity. We've been through this. So this is where you start to let go of stinginess. But it also helps with the development of being able to really let go of tanha, the craving. And then also it helps towards developing compassion, which we haven't been through in great depth, but we will do so as the medicine for the second unprofitable direction at some point. But by developing generosity, you're making inroads towards that, because it's part of the renunciation process. You're renunciating that which needs to be renunciated. And so it actually lifts the mind. If you spend time reflecting on all the times you help people, all the different times that you offered things to people that needed something, when you helped someone in great need, when you offered dana, when you paid homage to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, when you made offerings of flowers, the different pujas, all different things, when you look after your parents, when you help someone out at work from generosity rather than stinginess. These are the different things that lift the mind. Now, there is a tendency to also personalize these things, but what I would recommend is seeing it that you are tuning in with the frequency of generosity, the collective frequency, radio frequency, if you will, of generosity that we are all party to, rather than saying, I did this and I did that. Rather than do that, because that will bring your mental brightness down, think of it more of a frequency that everybody who is doing good is on that frequency of doing good. And so that's where the mind connects. Then also we talked about sense restraint, the security guard. So we've talked a number of times in this session about it. So it's very important. You can see it through the simile of the tortoise. You can see it through Sangvara Sutta. You can see it even through the Chunda Sutta we just went through. Also through the Sekapatipada Sutta. So there's many different ways of looking at it, but it's really establishing that security guard. Even the Pamada Vihari Sutta, establishing that security guard. So you guard your mind, guard all your sense faculties, and so you don't fall from that and fall into the wrong things, and therefore activate dependent origination and suffer more, create more sadness and mental heaviness. Then also the 5 frequent contemplations. That meditation is the reason Buddha says frequently do this is because it's so very helpful. It corrects so many wrong views, corrects so many wrong thoughts and perceptions. It makes them healthy. It makes our perceptions, our thoughts, our view healthy. It corrects it. But especially the one on kamma, understanding that we are the owner and the heirs of our kamma, we're bound to it. Then we understand a bit more about this sadness. And the other parts to the meditation are also very helpful, very, very helpful at this time and also beyond this time. And then the last thing that we had gone through about, is it worth taking as me and mine? That meditation, of course, is very helpful, because when we think out of conceit, we can try and fix this, that it's worth taking as me and mine, these death-bound things, then we start to see this truth. We develop this wisdom, and then we don't go towards these things. It makes the work of the security guard easier. And then, of course, you can meditate on all feelings result in the 3 kinds of dukkha. So it's easy to give up feelings. You know how people say, I have all the feels, I'm feeling everything. But the thing is, feeling is not something that one should take refuge in. One needs to actually not respond to feeling, not to respond to any kind of feeling, because it all results in dukkha. When you know that so deeply from your meditation, then it becomes easy in everyday life to start to train, to not succumb to these feelings, to not try and fix it, and to accept whatever conditions, are there. And of course, those that know how to cultivate equanimity and cultivate them through the iddhipadas, that's also very, very helpful. It's a must right now. So I can't really emphasize that enough. Those that know how to develop the iddhipadas, sustain upekkha from that point, please do so. Please use these tools right now. And of course, on the right-hand side of this slide, we have contact as nutriment. So if you meditate on contact as nutriment and you see how you go to this wrong way through hate, what you also see is that you go towards sadness, this heaviness in the mind. Like when you work very hard to fix everything, even through our job, even through our families, even through our relationships, whether they're our family or our partner, even through our friends, even through our Dhamma teachers, even through our students, even through our kalyana mittas, the way that we try and fix it through contact as nutriment, we end up very sad. We work so hard to fix, to make it better, and we end up so sad. You really see it in this contact as nutriment. You see the shoulds. It shouldn't be this way, but it is. It slides, and I really must fix this, but you can't. And then the sadness is there. That mental heaviness is there, and you really, when you see it, you realize actually this is not the way to solve this. And so what I encourage is, even beyond what we've spoken about today, what's really important is any meditation that you can do that lifts your mind, that develops the right concentration from right view, do those meditations as much as possible. I can't emphasize it enough. You don't have to do a whole swag of meditations. If you can, that's great, because you're trying to train yourself. But as has been said in one of the most recent encouragements, is pick the 1 or 2 that really lifts the mind. Because if you can absorb the mind with right concentration, then you're going beyond the hindrances. So the hindrances of sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and worry, and doubt. And when you go beyond the hindrances, you are protected. The mind is in a very calm and settled place. Think of it being like with the Buddha, with the noble arahants. You're with the right teachers. And what people don't realize is that when you are in these higher absorptions, if you're very suvacha, if you're very obedient, and maybe some people don't like that word, but if you're willing to be instructed, you're easy to instruct. That's what suvacha means. As opposed to duvacha, you turn away from being instructed. You rather do something else. You rather go towards pamada, the negligence, and try and solve things with the wrong things. Then what you do is you block arahants being able to help you. You block the Buddha being able to help you. But what we also don't realize is that there are living arahants in the other realms, in the Suddhavasa realms, the pure abodes. Even many anagamis. And so when you lift the mind to a higher state, you can be helped. And so that's the thing to remember. Keep lifting the mind, keep brightening the mind at the first instance. Your go-to is always these higher mind states, the one that is free of hindrances. because then you're protected from trying to fix it in the wrong way. And the mind gets brightened, you have more wisdom, the spiritual faculties are up. If you have Magapalachitta, the path and fruit, if you have any of these, then they are also activated. From that point, one can be helped. And so I encourage in this way, and this is the answer through a number of different Dhamma pieces to answer this question on domanassa, on sadness, on loneliness, on the mental pain. So we can share the blessing and we can share the merit with all sentient beings. May all beings be happy and well. May all beings find the right path, the Noble Eightfold Path. May all beings be free from suffering. Blessings of the Triple Gem, wishing you all well. Teruan Saranai.